I think it should be short. But I'm sorry to tell you, from my moderate knowledge, and the second point is that I always find it suspicious when people mock too much Karadzic as a poet. No, you remember, I quote a poem by him. Sorry, I read by celebrated Slovene poets, much worse poems than that one. This brings me to one of the things that I would like to develop later. It's one of the crucial points which can orient us in this ethical confusion today. The problem is not that Karadzic was a bad poet. The problem is that he wasn't a bad poet. In what sense? In the sense that what is so difficult for us to accept is that horrible things can happen and are legitimized even by high culture. Let's go with the Karadzic logic to the end. When I was reading history of SS in Germany, figures like Reinhard Heydrich, who basically organized the Holocaust, fascinated me. Why? An evil guy, if there ever was. Organized Holocaust, my God. But then, did you know that the same Heydrich in the evenings, evenings, metaphorically, when he was free, very often met with his other SS officers' friends, and they formed a string quartet, and they played music which is, I'm sorry to tell you, top of the top of Western music, late Beethoven's string quartets. Now it's too easy to say, it must be a fake. No, from what we know, it's not a fake. And in my earlier books, I developed this motive to the end, namely taking even more radical examples. Okay, can it be more radical than this one? Maybe it can. If you read European history and ask a naive, stupid question, which is, when did things go wrong so that Hitler emerged? I think we can. It's a little bit suspicious logic, but basically we can precisely define the moment when European history took the wrong turn. And retroactively, at least, we can say there, the first step towards Hitler was opened. The guy who is most responsible for it is Père Joseph, Father Joseph, a French priest who was kind of executive secretary of Cardinal Richelieu, the de facto executive leader of France in the time of 30 Years' War, 1600, I think, 1848, between Protestants and Catholics. What was the genius of Père Joseph? He proposed to Richelieu and then enacted it a simple, brutal formula. He told him, listen, forget about this Catholicism, blah, blah, or religion. It's not about that. The problem is to prevent the reunification of Germany so that France will remain the only superpower in Europe. And he succeeded. If you know history, you know what happened. In a totally opportunistic way, the Catholic France made a pact with Protestant Sweden against the Catholic Austrian Empire, just to prevent the unification of Germany. And it worked. The Germany, as you all know, was late for 150 to 200, even more years in unification. This was the moment which caused, at the beginning, the so-called German delay, which is the main reason, because Germany was, as we all know, too late for colonization for the First World War, the defeat in the First World War, Second World War, Hitler. Okay, it's a little bit simple explanation, but you got the logic. So Aldous Huxley wrote a wonderful book about this guy, Père Joseph, called L'Éminence Grise, The Grey Eminence. What fascinated Huxley is the following. On the one hand, as you already see from what I told you, Père Joseph was a brutal nightmare. Like, he did all possible, ordered torturing, poisoning, plot. Just imagine it. A real politician at its most terrifying. But then he was shocked to discover something, Huxley, that, again, something even much more crazy than Heydrich playing string quartets. Do you know that this same Father Joseph, every evening, okay, metaphorically again, every evening, after the work done, wrote letters to a certain convent nuns who were there in France, because he was in a correspondence with them about mystical topics. And that was the shock. This same guy, about whom we know that was unimaginable, cruel, real politician, wrote the most beautiful mystical reflections. Absolutely at the level of who are the top, how to put it, the top, the biggest hits, Saint Teresa, Joan of the Cross, you know, the big mystic. He is at that level, no way to escape it. So this is what intrigued Aldous Huxley. How is it possible that the same person who was a monster in what he did was in his inner life a breathtakingly refined mysticist? Huxley's solution was a false one. He said, please feel free to answer the phone. I would have done the same. And do what, as I did it I thanked to my good friend Alain Badiou for this is how we became friends. You know what Alain Badiou did to me once? He told me somebody will call me, so I lent him a cell phone. Then I was giving, like here, a talk. In the middle of the talk, he was sitting in front, the phone rang. He not only started to talk in the middle of me giving a talk, he even asked me, could I talk a little bit less loudly so that he can... I told him immediately, you can do this only to someone who is a real friend. This is, you know, I mean... Okay, sorry, let's go on. So Huxley's solution was too easy, to avoid the problem by blaming a particular culture. Huxley's solution was, this must have something to do with what is wrong in Christianity, with its obsession with Christ on the cross, this suffering and so on. So Huxley's solution, as maybe some of you know, if you are old enough, unfortunately some of you do seem to be like me, to remember hippie times, when Huxley was popular, not for this, but for his Doors of Perception and so on, books celebrating drugs and Eastern experience. For Huxley, the solution was the East. No? The solution was, let's go to Eastern spirituality, which is more holistic, passive, doesn't have this, how should I put it, potentially aggressive fixation on suffering and so on. I claim it brutally doesn't work. Another example here. I like these impossible, crazy examples. Let's jump from Heydrich to his boss, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler had a problem, and genuinely, I don't laugh at this, ethical problem, which he tried to solve. You know, he was maybe the most disgusting of all Nazi criminals, because he, much more than Eichmann, was this perfect bureaucrat, personally relatively honest, seriously bothered with ethical problems. Like in some of his letters, he asks that he was the first to admit that what Germans are doing to the Jews and to Slavs and others is horrible. No, it's terrible, killing children, even women, and so on. And as he put it, how can we justify this? He was the first to develop this wonderful in a terrifying sense, formula that the true heroic greatness is to not only sacrifice yourself for a higher ethical cause, but to sacrifice your ethics itself. Like, as he put it, any idiot can sacrifice himself for his country. It took a true hero to sacrifice his soul for his country. Like, you know, how to put it, let's say you fight in a war and an order is given to you, rape those women, kill those children. Of course, most of us are, unfortunately for these warriors, are however evil humans are, and they are, nonetheless, most of us, unfortunately, find it a little bit difficult. I don't know how it is with you, at least I would find it. If somebody would tell me, rape that women, kill the child, I would have small, nonetheless, problems. No?